And the student movement in some way also had to do with the anti-war movement in the Vietnam War, had to do with a struggle to redefine masculinity, but in part, young men who didn't want to be drafted in this sense, you know, it wasn't even, that wasn't a woman's issue except kind of standing by her man. The young men, the 19 and 20-year-olds, were getting drafted to go fight in a war that they didn't believe in. And when it got to be riots against the police, I think it had something to do with saying, even though we're not soldiers, even though we don't want to go to war, we're still men and we're not afraid of you. So, you know, the violence happened in this context and with a kind of a rhetoric of masculinity around it. Arendt doesn't mention that, of course, but I'm just, you know, just wondering what you make of it. And I think, you know, going back to Brian's sense of they win, and I wonder, you know, if when we say win like that, we're thinking of it in terms of some kind of maybe overly simplified domination.
All right, what else have we got? What would Mark? Oh no.
Yeah,
what would Mark say about Arendt?
What would Mark say about Arendt? Did I say that? Or
No, you said what would
What
Mark say about right, but then as I was in the middle of the sentence, I switched it up.
That's excellent. That's a great one, Todd.
Well, didn't Marx say that the revolutions have to be violent? Kind of, or they not have to, because they will be by their nature. By the time it's like their overthrow, you know, because by the time it gets to the breaking point of the revolution and they take over, didn't Marx say that it's going to be violent? And so I don't think that he would agree with a lot of her nonviolent and action messages.
But I think she would come back and counter, because I think it, in the human condition, doesn't she say that Marx, like, because he thought he discovered, like, the reasons behind everything, but she says he didn't do that, he just discovered another pattern. So she would be like, well, I think she would come back and counter with, if you were to follow his pattern, that might be what it is, but his pattern isn't true she's going to come back and say his pattern isn't true political action. So.
Why? That's good.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, because it doesn't, because labor's important, but it's a private thing. I mean, you can make labor political, but, you know, me making this table, it doesn't involve, I mean, it involves, but at its truest form, it doesn't really involve everybody else. To be political, you have to have, she talks about having the group, having the discussion, having the space and all the other stuff. Marx doesn't concern himself with any of that. He just is concerned with the conflict between two classes and not the bigger issues, I think, or political issues, I guess.
Yeah, like his idea of communism blurs private and public.
I think it would be completely dismissive about her. I think you would say that's all like up in the air and, you know, public and stuff, and you tell her to, you know, get real or whatever, to like that it's all about the material world, and she's too philosophical.
But too,
in a way.
Marx probably might have had a different outlook on stuff had he been through both the world wars.
That's true.
If he'd been through what?
Both the world wars and the things that he didn't have any concept of totalitarianism or anything like that, so it might have changed his.
A lot of stuff was like still theoretical for him. And
Yeah, he was still very.
I think, though, for the amount of social change that Marx wanted, though, you can't get that through peaceful protest. I mean, it would be a slow change, but for the amount of an upheaval that he called for, that would be pretty much impossible, because it would mean that the upper class would have to give away all of their power, and they're not going to give it away without force, without some sort of violence.
But I think Arendt is still, I mean, she's very much nonviolent. Politics is a discussion, back and forth, and I think they would agree on the fact that there has to be two sides and there has to be a discussion and some kind of conflict, because you can't have any kind of really understanding of the other side. I think they would agree on that point. But I agree with him. I think that Arendt is more of a slow, steady, continuous kind of action and change and action and change and action and change, kind of like a guess and check schedule. You change, and then if it doesn't work, you change it again. Where Marx is more of a instant gratification kind of guy, where he just wants it changed, and he wants it done now, and he wants it done completely.
Or even like he doesn't believe that like I don't know if it's like instant, because I think he like expects it to take a long time too. But he just
sure.
doesn't think that it can happen until
Until there's violence.
yeah.
There's a quote that she says earlier in the book, saying that Marx said violence is irrepressible violence. So if you're creating yourself, like if man's recreating himself, it needs to be there. Is what she said. Marx said.
I feel like they're both coming from really different places, because Marx is sort of saying this inevitable conflict is going to arise, and eventually there will be violence, right? Because it just will get so extreme. But I think Arendt's coming from this different perspective, where she has already been sort of dominated, and maybe she's not thinking about it in the same terms. I guess I need to think about this more.
I kind of get what you're saying. He's saying that the conflict is going to get,
Yeah.
one side is going to get so oppressive, the other side will just have to
Yeah,
fight
if
back.
no one did anything, perhaps in
She
Arendt's
would-
situation,
yeah.
totalitarianism would just take over and dominate. So they see two different ends if no one does
Yeah,
anything.
she went through one of the most probably oppressive regimes ever, and that his hypothesis didn't play out.
And Marx sees everything as tied to economics, whereas she completely, specifically doesn't talk about it.
She says politics in some sense transcends economics. There's always the chance that we can talk and agree upon a course of action in the most unexpected ways. We haven't read some of her work where she's talking about this kind of magic revolutionary moment where people come together and something happens that's unexpected and new. And it comes together when you least expect it, but you have to keep talking and keep showing up, or it won't happen. Whereas Marx basically says that economics transcends politics, so that this table, which we're using to sit around as our polis to launch our political action, only reflects class conflict and the history of class conflict. As we talked about, that the table embodies working class labor. We embody a certain kind of privilege with the intelligentsia, at least for this moment we are. And with Marx, in some ways you can't all talk. Even our ability to talk to each other is dominated by class structure. So if we were really to have a discussion about, should we talk about economics, for example? On the one hand, you can't talk with the Taliban, I don't think. Like you couldn't talk with the Nazis, although she found a Nazi to talk to, right? He sprung her. She found one individual isolated Nazi, and when she got him out of the marching line, he was capable of saying, "This is ridiculous, I don't know what I'm doing here with you, let's get you out." But to talk about the economy, to take action, to really be an Occupy movement, perhaps, I don't know, we would have to have at this table some of those gazillionaires. Maybe they're wrong. We'd have to have some homeless folks. We'd have to have some foreclosed people. We'd have to have unemployed, certainly some students.
Some middle class.
Yep. We'd
The
have
whole
to.
spectrum,
Yeah, we'd have to have illegal immigrants. We have to have everybody who's in the polis, everybody in our polis would have to be capable of showing up and speaking, and us being able to understand what they were saying, even the ones that don't speak much English, and the ones that are drug addicts and living on the street, and those homeless guys with their horrible kind of gray-black skin. I mean, they've just been out on the streets too long. And the foreclosed person that's trying to explain what was in the mortgage documents that they signed. And let's just do this. Maybe we can just go around the room on this question, make sure everybody gets into this. What would the difference be between Marx and Arendt on that prospect? Really bringing a community together, not just all of us who are more or less in the same class, I'm guessing, kind of, and speak the same language and are pretty educated. So, we're dealing with these really difficult theories and doing really well with it. What would the difference between Marx and Arendt be about that vision of political action?
Well, what do you think that the only reason why they would do that is because of economics? Like they would all only sit at this table if it benefited them economically?
Okay, it would certainly have something to do with.
Whereas like she would say like to form political action and to regain power, you would do that. So they're two different, like you have politics and then you have economics, which they both like interchange, I think, but I think they each hold them at vastly different standards.
And I don't think that Marx would say that anything would really come out of that discussion, that the billionaires would still be running whatever they want, and they would probably only put that discussion up in order to further the false consciousness of people and
I don't think
let
that-
them think they have a vote.
That sitting around would benefit the 1%, like that wouldn't benefit them at all. So economically, like
waste of their
opportunity costs, like they're not gonna spend their money sitting there. Like, what else could they be doing besides sitting there talking to the people that they're obviously not helping and aren't going to help just to sit? And I feel like a table like that would just be kind of like a political thing. Whereas it looks like we're trying to have a talk, it looks like we're trying to work it out, but they're not really going to. So it's,
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah.
Keep going. Okay, because basically what we've done is we said, well, we're not going to get the billionaires here because it's not worth their time.
it's not.
Yeah. Good.
If they did, it would just be purely political. They would do it to make it seem like they were going to help, they were going to continue
Good
that,
PR.
Well, and
like
even,
that false advertising.
and even if they say they got the billionaires came to the table and were acting like they were interested in involved in the conversation, but even if they truly did want to be part of the conversation and thought that they could, benefit from it economically in some way, I think it reminds me of the point that she made that as long as the system's still in place, it doesn't matter what little gains you think you might get from them, because even if they open up a new store and hire people that helps us the lower cost get jobs in the working class, but they still benefit from all that money, and then it's just even if they want to they're in that place as can't. So I don't think that Marx thinks that would anything would come from that.
Well, and she also believes that if you're going to start that table, you have to be willing to at least understand you don't have to agree with the other side, but understand them. And I don't think Marx would agree that you could get that many to people from that many different classes and have them even be willing to understand each other.
Yeah, I hate to bring right
Good,
you're having to do it
thank
because
goodness.
it's
I was waiting for
well, I
Ray
mean,
to
because
say
it's already kind of a
something.
complex conversation, but I keep thinking of that part in his book where he talks about the way that the upper classes live in a society now where they don't even have to be around lower class people,
Yeah.
and that I just can't help but think about that, and their ability to relate with these people that they never have come in contact with is probably not much.
Or non-existent.
Yeah, and except for the exceptions, which who knows, few and far between.
And sometimes it's not, it might not even be their fault, like, it's just like, that's like the system too, like, that's the way that they've been born into this, and like, they don't, I mean, if they're like in high school, you know, growing up, and their parents just keep them around all the other rich kids and stuff, and then they don't, you know, they can't help it, and then it's like ongoing, just ignorance and just, yeah, the divide.
Like with public school zoning, you're pretty much in the same economic class with all the kids you grew up with. And like, it's rare when you have like the kids staying at the motel in your class. Like I remember, I went to Reno High and we had like really rich kids, and then we had like some kids that were really not well off. And I remember like being kind of shocked, like in middle school, like seeing new people I hadn't seen that like were definitely didn't grow up where I grew up. Like I like distinctly remember like feeling up, like not that they were out of place, but just like noticing that they were different.
I went to Galena and we had the same thing. Like we had Arrow Creek, which is incredibly affluent, and then we also had kids from Mill Road. And in my school, there was a distinct separation between the upper middle class white kids hung out in the parking lot. The lower class Hispanic, whatever, kids from Neal Road hung out in the cafeteria, and like the two never intersected. There was not a time when, other than like specific school events when we were all together, there was even in off hours we were still very, very separated again along class lines.
And even with the classes I took, I was separated.
Yeah.
Like, not to say I'm anything, but like in my
No,
AP
it's
classes, I didn't
reality,
have,
Yeah.
at least I didn't notice it.
It's the same thing with my high school. That was
Or if you
decades.
did, it was an anomaly that there was a kid from Neal Road or wherever in your AP.
Like, I definitely agree that we, like, the rich, like, the super rich never had to encounter the super poor because, like, they went off to private schools or went off to boarding schools or, you know, or, like, the one that went to public school and was just super smart was probably in their own little world being super smart by themselves. So
this theoretical like polis that she's trying to create doesn't happen because they're separate, perhaps. Because I mean, she's not necessarily saying we all literally have to sit at a table together, right? I mean, maybe she doesn't mean that when she says that, or when we were joking. I guess we're kind of like talking about how it'd have to be this diverse group of people. But I mean, that's never actually going to happen. So I mean, how could that like symbolically happen? You know?
So she's saying just show up, and we can't see it, right?
Well, and I kind of think maybe if you take it into the smaller perspective of not of the whole polis, but within your own class of people, you know, then like, you know, like the lower class people, like the working class in Marx's theories, they work together and like spoke together, and then they all, you know, banded together, and their enemy became the bourgeoisie and stuff. But instead of like including the proletariat and the bourgeoisie all together and trying to keep together, it became within itself. And so that kind of like, it did work out by them talking and like amongst each other at the table within each of their classes. But then they, I don't know, then they go violent Marxist things, so that's not really.
like you have to unify as a class in
Yeah.
order to get
Yes,
anything
you
done.
might
Like,
have to, or not even as a class, along
Just like your
ideologies or
interests.
ideas, you might have to start small. I think jumping in and saying to get everybody from all these different walks at a table is a little bit far-fetched, but if you started, like with the Occupy, that's a small enough movement to get the people that have the same general ideas, maybe different perspectives on those ideas, around in the place we start a discussion, then maybe you can get enough going. And if you get enough of those groups, then those groups might be able to talk like amongst each other. I don't know if that I can agree. I don't think getting everybody together is realistic or could even possibly work.
and I think if all the Occupy groups got together as a group, it would be much more effective than each little group having their own goals and such, because, I mean, nothing has really
I
come
don't
from
know if
that.
that's possible.
I'm not,
Right, so if there is a 99%, so what, and some of you have not yet put your 2 cents on the table about this, but it looks like we're saying that Arendt is kind of unrealistic here. way to say her.
Oh yeah, she's totally unrealistic. Mainly in the way that she divides public and private. I feel that a lot of the conflict that is occurring is through that division. Like, that's the reason violence is occurring. Everything is political. In a sense, whether you think it is or not. Like, if we gathered all those diverse individuals around the table, the reason they're going to have conflict is because the division of public and private through their experiences.
Okay, talk a little more about that. That's great. As you were talking, I just had an image of a lot of little poor kids running around while their parents were trying to talk, because, you know, there's no daycare.
Yeah.
No political daycare.
Okay, well, just like simply like, let's think about like separation of church and state. That's a good
That's a good
example of public and private. The reason that a lot of these differences are occurring that sometimes end up in violence is because of that. It's causing more like problems. People are becoming more confused. Like, is my religion accepted by the state, or is it, you know, a personal thing? But like, what really does that mean? Because it's still becoming political in a sense, even though you're dividing it. I really don't think there's any degree of private life.
Or if you look at atheists in regards to
Yeah.
the government, they're forced to believe in, like not believe, but they're forced to think in the idea of God on a daily basis. Some record classes. It's automatic.
And like in school, you know, you get 2 weeks off for